For those who do not know me, can you please tell me your name on the count of three? 1, 2, 3. Damn, I'm never going to remember that. Before we get into the serious stuff, this is a jackalope. My understanding is that people were giving them out yesterday, and it followed us around, and we had a jackalope hashtag going for a little while. I will publicly thank on Twitter and or give a hug to anyone who can get me a jackalope by the end of the day. So, no, not that one. That's her Petraeus. So, this is not a jackalope. This is me last year. As we all know, there are three major problems in software development: naming things and off-by-1 errors. I know that I was born to be a programmer because I got my name right and my chromosomes are off by 1. So we also had some major problems in tech in Chicago last year. There were no fewer than 5 Corys in the Ruby community, so I often heard, which Cory are you? And we also have a problem with not enough women in technology. We heard a lot of, is that your girlfriend? Or you must be from marketing. So I decided to solve both of those problems this year because I'm an activist, and I think I can do what I can to bring more women into technology and also eliminate one of the Corys from the scheme. So this is me in IRB. Thank you. This is me in IRB. Notice there's no created at date. That's protected. If you're a front-end developer, this is me in JSON. I was going to render it in JavaScript, but I didn't know how many equal signs to use. And if we have any enterprise developers in the house, we have some XML here too. Okay, we're going to talk about some serious stuff today. I'm very passionate about learning and teaching, especially teaching people who are new to our field, especially developers who are coming from underrepresented populations. And in my work, outside of work, I focus very heavily on people who are from the LGBT community and women. I've been a mentor at Dev Bootcamp. I volunteered at Starter League. I've been a teacher's assistant at Girl Develop It classes, and I also taught inner city kids an Introduction to Ruby class through a program called IC Stars. So these experiences cemented for me how important it is that we be very deliberate and very thoughtful about how and why we shepherd people into our profession. There are things we're doing really well, and there are things we're doing not very well at all. We're definitely not close to solving the problem, but we're intrigued by it. Now, whenever we're in an interview situation, we say that we're interested in solving difficult problems. Let's prove it. There are lots of approaches to understanding the problem of onboarding and bringing new people in. The one that we're going to talk about today is apprenticeships. So I want to set some context. I wanted to talk to you about this very unique period in history, an amazing time, a time of incredible change. The speed of progress is breathtaking. We're redefining ourselves and our culture and our values. Boundaries are breaking down. We're increasingly international in our culture and our thinking. Food is plentiful. The days of subsistence farming are far, far behind us. Jobs and populations are moving from rural areas to urban centers. International trade booming. Population growing, expected to double in the next 100 years. Market economies are outpacing traditional economies at an astonishing rate. In our work, we're increasingly specializing. We're getting narrow but deep skill sets, and we're in high demand. Financiers from across the world are funding our ideas. There's massive expansion going on. We're radically redefining what business means. We still have some problems that we have to deal with. We have poverty. The line between rich and poor, huge. We have a vanishing middle class. And increasingly, people are having to turn to civil and religious organizations for social services because younger generations are moving to the city, they're leaving their parents and grandparents behind, so the family safety nets are not there. What's more, small government advocates are bringing their successes with conservative fiscal policies to social policies as well, further undermining the social network. But it's not all dismal. These problems are very real, but we have incredible opportunities in front of us, opportunities for success that were unimaginable 2 generations ago. The definition of what it means to be wealthy or successful, we're redefining it. The future is ours. The future was ours until the Great Famine of 1315, followed by the arrival of the Black Death in 1348. So we're not the special snowflakes we thought we were. This is not a unique time in history. This is exactly what happened in the 10th through 12th centuries in Europe. So how did they react to changes in their culture, in their economy, and the demand for their workforce? That's what we're going to explore today. So artisans and apprentices creating a 21st century workforce using 12th century best practices. I want to start by exploring how we teach young people, in general, how we teach young people. The earliest known form of society that humans formed is the Huntergatherer Society. It was prevalent across the world and actually still exists in a lot of places in the world today. Family and social groups were responsible for passing down survival skills and culture. Peter Gray talked quite a bit. He's a psychologist. He did a lot of studying hunter-gatherer societies to find out how children learn. And we all sort of assume that the boys would learn how to hunt by going out with the older men, and the women would learn how to pick up the skills that they needed to take care of the village by working with the older women. What actually happens, though, is that the young people form parallel villages. They form villages within villages where they act out all of the roles of the adults that they see around them. They experiment. They try out new things. So by the time they're ready to be adults, they have possibly innovated on the survival skills that the tribe already had. So there's a constant re-examination of what works and what doesn't work, and what's good and not good, that is constantly happening with the young people in the tribe. So this is a great way of transmitting information and culture while allowing room for innovation. But as time went on, most hunter-gatherer societies turned into stationary communities, originally organized around farming and later organized around trade. People began to specialize. The tools and the technologies that we use became more complex. Parents could no longer teach their kids everything they needed to survive and thrive in the world. So young people started being sent to specialists for training. The relationship between newcomers and people who were established ensured that critical expertise was not lost between generations. And in time, these relationships were formalized into apprenticeships. The first apprenticeships that we know about, that we have documented, were established in the Code of Hammurabi, where it was actually by law, as a craftsman, you were required to teach your craft to an X number of young people. Apprenticeships continue to be practiced in Egypt for about 1,000 years. Scribes and priests especially, young people were sent to work with masters of those professions and learn everything they could so that they could continue the practice and continue the culture. In the Han Dynasty in China, apprenticeships were actually passed down from generation to generation. And for example, if you had doctors in your family, your mother or your father was a doctor, one of the children would be selected to be a doctor as well. And some people actually recommended that you not go to a doctor with less than 3 generations of practicing medicine in their family. And the apprentices they took on were very important to them because the master's reputation was on the line. What that apprentice did reflected on them. And finally, in Rome, apprentices families were responsible for teaching basic morals and basic cultural values, but for professions, for boys, they were sent to apprentices to learn their craft. So by the time apprenticeships got to 12th century Europe, they were pretty well established. By the 14th century in England, apprenticeships were actually required in order for you to practice your trade. We can't really talk about apprenticeships in Europe without talking about guilds. Merchants were the first professionals to form guilds. The word comes from gilden, which is a Saxon word for to pay, and that actually is referring to the fees that merchants would pay for mutual protection, especially when they were traveling about. Artisans soon followed suit. By the 12th century, there were fraternal orders of artisans that had sprung up all across Europe. So guilds had a few goals. They wanted to establish standards so that only craftspeople with appropriate skill sets could actually practice and run their businesses. They wanted to promote high-quality practices so that there was a level-set expectation of the quality that any given craftsman would produce. That would prevent people from going to other cities or towns and hiring their craftspeople instead of the local people. So really, guilds were essentially about protecting their vested interests. They were a way of dividing up markets, limiting competition, and ensuring that any practitioner in any particular urban city was the sole practitioner of a given craft. So there were essentially associations of employers that were banded together to divide markets into monopolies, but they did have some positive side effects that were happy accidents, not by design. So to talk about how those the positives and negatives of the guild system, I want to tell the story of a couple of apprentices. The first one we're going to meet is Peter. Peter's from a rural area. His dad was a merchant, and his parents wanted him to have a better life than he did, so they wanted him to become a man of the cloth. They wanted him to enter the priesthood. But Peter was more interested in building churches than preaching in them. So after a lot of wrangling with his parents, he finally talked them into signing him up for an apprenticeship with Theodore, a master stonemason. His parents had to sign an indenture agreement, which basically said that for 2 years, Peter would have to work for Theodore, learn everything he could. In exchange, and he could not leave, he could not seek another master, and he could not marry. And in exchange, Theodore would provide him with food, shelter, clothing, and medical help, and give him the training he needed to start his career. So this was not an instructor-instructee sort of a relationship. The master did the master's work, and the apprentice imitated the master's work to the degree that he could, starting out very crude at first and gradually getting better over a period of many, many months. So one day Peter has an idea. He uses this mallet for the stone cutting jobs that he does, and he decides that it doesn't feel very comfortable in his hand, and he doesn't feel like he can wield it effectively. So he gets an idea for a way to improve the design of the mallet, and he spends nights for about a week working on an improved design for this mallet, and he's very, very proud of it. And he goes and shows it to his master the next day. And his master actually is not happy at all. His master beats him because he's not supposed to be innovating. He's supposed to be learning the craft. He's supposed to be learning what the master does and imitating it and perfecting it, not innovating. So this guild system, this apprenticeship system, tended to be very technologically conservative. So the next winter, Peter gets very ill and is not able to work. Theodore pays for a doctor to come and visit him, pays for the herbs he needs to break his fever, and eventually he returns to work. As his last 2 years of indentureship come to an end, he's introduced to the Master's Guild. The Master's Guild sends him to another city to work under another master as a journeyman. There's a brief ceremony, there's a brief test, and Peter knows that he's no longer an apprentice, he's now a journeyman. He spends the next few years traveling around, and he works for various masters. He gets to a particular city, and he's given the honor of building an archway for the priory, which is a tremendous honor. And he completes it, and he's very proud of his work. And he goes to the master, and he says, I would like you to consider this a masterwork. And what the word masterwork means is, if a journeyman completed a masterwork and got a master's recommendation, that journeyman would no longer have to be tested when they moved to a new job site by the local guild. They would have basically a letter of passage that allowed them to practice their profession. Well, the master declined the offer. So he was very, very upset about this. He spent the next few years traveling from city to city, again, wherever the guild told him to go, wherever the guild told him to work. And in time, he found out that his master, Theodore, was on his deathbed. So he traveled home to say goodbye and to comfort his master. As a parting gesture, his master recommended to the local guild that Peter be admitted as a master craftsman. So as a master stonemason, he was able to take over his master's operation, to take over his business, and practice in the city that was close to his home. And in time, he had his own apprentices as well, and the legacy continued. So let's switch to modern day. This is Ethan Woodward. He's a kid from Indiana. His parents wanted him to go to school and be an MBA, but he wanted to get into software, and he wanted to have a startup. So he dropped out of college. He moved to Chicago. He got a job in tech support. He tried learning to program on his own. He did some online resources, got some books, but he decided he needed something a little more structured. And he heard that there was a boot camp starting up in Chicago, so he applied for it. And unlike most of the people who applied, he actually got accepted. So he spent the next month reading everything he could read, getting his computer set up for development, and finally the boot camp starts. He would spend about 11 or 12 hours a day in class, and about another 4, 5, or 6 hours with his classmates working on special projects. He was learning new tools and techniques. He didn't really have a chance to stop and ask why or what or how. Everything was very, very rote. Everything was very, you have to do this next, you have to do that next, you have to do that next, you have to master this technology and that technology. Weeks went by without a good night's sleep. He worked himself very, very hard, and he got sick. He was down for about a week. His instructors were very accommodating, but they didn't think he could keep up with the class anymore, so they arranged for him to join the next cohort. He formed strong bonds with the other students in his cohort, and he met several prominent developers from local companies who would come in and give talks. When he finished the program and they had their job fair, he got a job at a local startup for a decent salary. He got hired on as a junior developer. He was on a team with 2 other juniors and 1 mid-level developer. Because they were a startup, they were racing to the finish line constantly. They were always trying to get the product out, always trying to get the next revision of the product out, always building on new features. There wasn't a lot of time for him to train, to work with the mid-level developer, to learn new things. The pace was just too fast for any kind of structured mentorship. He worked there for about a year, and then, of course, they went out of business. So he eventually got hired at a larger, more established company. The team was much larger. The pressure was much lower. The pace of work was much lighter. But there was not any support at all at this organization for ongoing support and learning. So he was really left to fend for himself. He eventually got up to mid-level developer and became a team lead, and he was relatively satisfied with his career. He was tired of the long hours of being a developer, and it wasn't really satisfying to him, so he became a PM. And he left behind his dreams of building his business. He left behind his dream of being a developer because he did not have the support from his peers, from the community, and from his employer for continued growth in education. So apprenticeships today are not the same as they were in the 12th century, but there are definitely some strong similarities. The initial investment in becoming an apprentice, we think of medieval apprentices as sort of children who were sent off to work with a master. Actually, families had to pay a fee, an indenture fee, to the master to take their child on, to take their son on. And this fee was very, very high. So really only upper middle class or rich families could afford to pay the fee at all. And today we have tuition fees that average $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 for software boot camps. When you were an apprentice in the 12th century, you did not have any free time. You were not allowed any free time. You were not allowed to socialize. Today, you can and you could have a family, but it's very impractical because of the hours you have to put in at the boot camp to get the most out of it. There was formal training that was provided in the 12th century. You knew where you were in the hierarchy. You knew what you had to do to achieve the next level. Here, training is WYSIWYG. You're lucky if you get any on-the-job training. You're lucky if you have a mentor. You're lucky if you're able to learn and grow as part of your paid work. In terms of the material support, during the early stages of your career, during your apprenticeship, during your time at a boot camp, you had complete coverage for everything you needed as an apprentice in the 12th century. You had room, you had board, you had food, you had clothing, you had medical care if you needed it. Today, we don't do any of those things for young people who are entering our profession. We had formal mentoring. Today, we have very informal mentoring. A lot of boot camps will try to set up a student with a mentor, but it's really hard to found and forge those long-term relationships that people really need to guide them all the way through their careers. That's something that really doesn't happen very much anymore. It was kind of interesting. A few years ago, I was working with a junior developer. He had a couple of years of experience, and he got very angry at me one day, and he's like, "Why is it that you're a senior developer and I'm just a junior developer? What's the difference?" And I was kind of shocked and didn't really know how to answer that, except I've been doing this for a long time and I know how to do stuff. But it pointed out a problem. We don't have a clear delineation between levels of experience and levels of expertise. We sort of guess, what job can we get? And I'll apply for a senior position and see if I get it, see if they believe that I'm a senior. Well, back in the 12th century, it was very clear where you are in that hierarchy. You had a very clear goal, and you knew exactly what to do to achieve it. So I want to talk about boot camps. Guilds provided a formal system for onboarding people into their careers. Today, we have colleges and boot camps. These are responses to increasing demand for developers in our field. In 2002, there were an estimated 600,000 software development jobs. In 2012, there were over 1 million. And the growth is projected to be 22% by the US government. As the half-life of specific technologies and tools gets shorter and shorter, universities are less able to adjust their curricula to meet the changing needs of technology. So what's happening increasingly is that students are coming out of college without the skills they need to actually perform their job. According to, again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 27% of college graduates end up with a job that is directly related to their degree program. As technology jobs get more lucrative, a lot of people are moving out of their existing careers and into software development. So there's also a large population, not just of people coming out of college, but people who are already established in their lives who want to get into software development. So intensive training programs, boot camps, have been springing up over the past few years in the United States and abroad. The cost is around $1,000 per week for 9 to 12 weeks. And some boot camps have estimated over 80% placement rates. So compare that to the 27% of a university. Boot camps have the advantage of short cycles. They can iterate on their curriculum very frequently. They can adjust to new tools and technologies. They can adjust based on the needs of local employers. Most students at boot camps look like these guys. They're young 20-something-year-old white guys. Very few women and very few people of color enter boot camps. And some of it is because of the cost. Some of it is because of the time investment. If you already have a family, if you have people who are depending on you, you can't really take 12, 16 hours a day to spend on building your career for 12 weeks. If you're supporting your family, you can't afford that time off of work without pay. If you can't meet that fee, you can't get in at all. So boot camps are selecting from a privileged class of people in the same way that guilds were selecting from a privileged class of people. Now, some boot camps are starting to offer scholarships. There are some women-only boot camps. This is a positive step, but we're really not where we need to be yet. There are different pay schedules. Some boot camps will collect payment after a student gets a job. I've seen numbers of like 20% of their annual salary being paid back to the boot camp. Some people will refund part of your tuition when you get a job from a boot camp. And of course, there are scholarships. So payment varies. State regulators are beginning to pay attention to boot camps, pointing to the fact that there's no standardization. They make a lot of claims about their success rates, but they're not required to document any of them. And what happens if a student does not get a job and has spent $12,000? What can they do? Is the boot camp liable for that? So it's interesting that graduates from boot camps tend to favor regulation of that industry because they want to preserve the reputation of the organization that they went through and that gave them their opportunity. Whereas most boot camps are resistant to the idea of regulation because they believe it'll slow them down and put them in the same position as universities. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out over time. So guilds and boot camps, what do they have in common? They both seek to establish baseline standards. What are the minimum qualifications that are required to perform in a particular job? And really, these are in response to local employers and what local employers are demanding. Boot camps do not operate in a vacuum. They work very, very closely with the hiring organizations in their area. They want to provide a reliable means of transmitting training information from one generation to the next, preserving knowledge in a given field. They want to not just meet demand, but manage demand. They want to impact the local job market. They have a lot of control over how many people are available in the job pool, how many people can apply for the jobs. Are they coming from far away? Are they coming from nearby? What do they look like? They're carefully calibrated. So guilds and boot camps have some common problems. They are both, in a way, they're both subject to laws of competition that they would probably prefer that were not there. In the guild system, if there were competing guilds, if you were a stonemason and you had to choose between guilds, if you were a consumer who was using the services of a stonemason, which one do you prefer? Which one do you use? Which one has the higher quality? In the same way, multiple boot camps in the same city are producing candidates with different skill sets. So as an employer, which candidates do you trust? Which boot camps do you want to work with? There's some competition there. There's no standardization there. Both guilds and boot camps take a very conservative approach to competition because even though boot camps can iterate on their curricula more frequently, more quickly, there's some impact there. They have to retrain staff or make sure that their staff have opportunities to learn and grow and adopt new technologies. So it's in their best interest to really use the lowest common denominator, most in-demand technologies, and thus, in a way, affect the technologies that candidates entering the job market in that city are going to be comfortable using. I talked about privilege. I talked about both guilds and bootcamps drawing from populations of people who can afford to use them. This is a serious problem. Who can pay $1,000 a week and not get a salary for 9 to 12 weeks? It's not average people. It's not underprivileged people. It's people from wealthy families, for the most part. The social capital of shared norms, social enforcement, the shared experience of going through a boot camp, all of these things create what is a very strong network effect. The bonds that form between people who go through the boot camp process and who enter their careers at the same time operate to exclude people who did not go through that same process. That's just human nature. So that can form a monoculture. They have the same experiences drawn. They have the exact same education that they went through. They're going to be open to each other's ideas and hesitant to incorporate other people's ideas. What I think is one of the most scary parts of a monoculture is that it creates an oligarchy, ruled by the old, ruled by the senior. Oligarchies, monocultures, meritocracies, they create artificial distinctions between people. They perpetuate the idea that mastery of software development is possible, and they place people at different points in that spectrum. Essentially, they create, among developers, a class system. The class system puts senior members of the community in a position of great power and gives them a very powerful voice. It also insulates them from personal responsibility, insulates them from criticism. It amplifies their voices, and it doesn't even matter what it is they're saying. They don't lose their power. The amplification means that with very little effort, with very few keystrokes, you can undo the effort of people who are working very hard to affect change in a community. Again, no repercussions. De facto leaders have a platform to say what's on their minds without really thinking about it. They put members of the community in the awkward position of having to defend the community to people who are on the outside and say, well, he doesn't speak for me. Things that are said that are wrong, that are outdated, that are offensive, without an equivalently powerful social media platform from which to speak, your voice is drowned out. So what we need is to not only teach how to do JavaScript, how to use Ember, how to do Ruby and Rails. We need to teach Citizenship, the new generation of developers that's coming out. We need to practice values-driven development. Encourage new people to explore and articulate what their values are. Help them find ways that they can actually practice their values as part of the practice of their profession. Show them that it's okay to be authentic, that it's okay to be wrong, that it's okay to stop and think. Show them that they don't have to compromise their values to be successful. Healthy communities are about dialogue. If you have a community where everyone is saying the same thing and no one disagrees with each other, what you have is not a community but an echo chamber. Critics of the status quo tend to be silenced, tend to be stifled, tend to not have the platform that people representing the status quo have. So if you see someone that is standing for something, see someone who's expressing outrage or expressing disappointment or calling someone out for behavior that is not appropriate for the community, don't just favorite them, retweet them, amplify their voice. That's all of our responsibilities. If one of our leaders says something that's racist, that's sexist, that's homophobic, that's transphobic, that's otherwise discriminatory, that's just wrong or just stupid, it's our responsibility to call them out on it. No one is above scrutiny. The most important thing we do as we shepherd in new generations of developers is share our values with them. The things about our community that drew us to the community will erode. They will go away unless we very, very actively pass them on to new generations. Your values are your most important legacy, not your code. So how can we improve apprenticeships? How can we improve the process by which we get new people to enter our field? We can establish best practices. for helping newcomers master the tools and technologies they need to do their job, but also to understand why they're using these technologies and open them up to contributing back to the projects that enable them to do their jobs. More focus on problem solving, less focus on specific tools and technologies and techniques. Make them good problem solvers. Make sure that we're communicating empathy and community and openness as part of our teaching. Make sure that as experienced practitioners, we're open to questions, we're open to new ideas, we're not so set in our ways that we can't see innovations that younger people, that newer people are bringing to the table. We can also establish clear success criteria so that as people move through their careers, they know where they are, they know what the expectations of them are, and they know where they should go next. We should create long-term, that's for you, Liz, long-term mentoring relationships to guide people through all phases of their career, not just the onboarding. The manatee has become the Mento, right? Yeah. So how can we improve boot camps? We can increase diversity. I'm pretty sure I worked with that guy. I'm not positive. We lower financial barriers to entry. We provide flexible hours for boot camps, flexible learning schedules, reaching out directly to underrepresented populations and saying, you're welcome here. We're open. We can open the door to innovation, encourage discovery, encourage questioning the status quo, encourage experimentation, just like the children in the Hunter-Gatherer Societies. We can provide sponsorship. As employers, we can sponsor people who are going through boot camps. It's in our best interest, and we can be doing some actual social good. So maybe instead of a drink up, sponsor 10 students who are going through a boot camp. We can provide health care to people who are entering their professions. We can provide health care to students attending boot camp. You can't learn, you can't grow, you can't work effectively if you're worried about how you're going to pay for your meds. And we should finally provide ongoing learning opportunities, ongoing opportunities for growth for people who are established in their careers so they don't get stagnant, so they get beyond the job placement stage, they still have the support of their community and their peers. So I'd like us to help each other realize the potential of the era in which we live. I'd like us to reach out to people who are new and offer them our support. I'd like us to turn to our peers, offer them support, and receive support from them as well. I want us to create institutions and resources for learning and continued growth and continued experimentation. And most importantly, I want us to hold our leaders accountable as de facto spokesmen for our communities and make sure that the values that we're passing on to new people entering our field are the values that we have very carefully, very thoughtfully, and very deliberately crafted and articulated for ourselves. Once more, we find ourselves living in a very exciting era, an era of great change. Let's get it right this time. Thank you.